So just for the Zoom people who've just arrived, we're just a couple of minutes late, so bear with us as we get everyone seated. Check they're not in there. So hello everybody, and just as we are getting everybody seated, I'll give you a couple of bits of housekeeping before we continue. One of them is that the toilets, if you need them, just come around the front here and down through that door, and there's a lit up cubicle back there, and that's where the toilet is. And also the book is front and centre at the counter tonight. And for those of you who have joined us on Zoom, you can call the shop and purchase it, pay for it, and we will personally sign it for you, and we can also post it if you pay the postage. So call the shop on 3846 3422 07 3846 3422, and you can get yours personally signed, and we can either pick it up later or we can post it out to you. So that's bits of housekeeping. Please feel free to come in. We're not started yet. We're just chattering to people. So there's a couple of seats here, and there's a couple of seats in the front row.
Oh, the whole front row.
The very front row. The other front row.
Probably better.
So we'll just wait for a few more minutes while people are arriving. I think there was a bit of traffic.
It's actually kind of like my wedding, because everyone I've ever met in my life is here.
I didn't dress for your wedding though. I didn't dress up for it.
I didn't get an invitation.
Where's the cake?
Well, that means it is cake then.
One would hope. So I think, Rob, are we reaching maximum from out there?
We certainly are reaching
Excellent.
maximum. We're on the approach.
A couple of people still coming, so we'll just hum and sing, I think, while we're waiting. That's fine. We might kick off though, I reckon, and people can join us after. All right, let's kick off. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on in this area, the Yagara and the Turrbal people. I'd like to pay my deepest respects to elders, past, present and emerging. And also to acknowledge that because we're on Zoom, we are zooming out onto the lands of many different Aboriginal people all around Australia, and pay my respects to elders that you're on the lands you're zooming in from as well. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and sovereignty was never ceded. One tiny bit of housekeeping I forgot to say was, if you've got your phone with you, if you can switch it to silent. We do encourage the partaking of social media, because it's always a nice way to get more information about the book out into the world. So feel free to Instagram, Facebook, tweet. We're at AvidReader4101 if you want to tag us, or even I'm going to work out how TikTok plays out in this new world one day. Do you have any idea how?
I know that BookTok is a big thing.
Yeah, so whatever you do on BookTok, I don't know, I think it might be filming with dances.
We're not doing that, Krissy, that's out.
Okay, we're not doing it. You at home can film some little dances for BookTok if you'd like. I really need to know what it is. I'm sounding like an old person. Anyway, as we get our last few people seated, I'm Krissy Kneen, and I'm going to welcome Toni Jordan to Avid Reader. Toni Jordan has worked as a molecular biologist, quality control chemist, TAB operator, and door-to-door aluminium siding salesperson. Now that is a diverse CV. She is the author of 6 novels, including the international bestseller Addition, which I think is at the counter as well. It was longlisted for the Miles Franklin Award, and 9 Days, which was awarded the Best Fiction at the 2012 Indie Awards and was named in Kirkus Review's Top 10 Historical Novels of 2013. And Our Tiny Useless Parts, which was longlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. Toni has been published widely in newspapers and magazines. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Physiology and a PhD in creative arts. Everybody welcome Toni Jordan. Now, dinner with the Schnabels or Schnabels?
Well, this is interesting because I don't know any Schnabels or Schnabels. I was just thinking of sounds that I really like, right? First of all, let me apologise for my croaky voice. I think it's because I spent 2 years in lockdown in Melbourne, not talking to anybody.
Yeah.
Like after about the first couple of months, I didn't even talk to Robbie. We like just send each other email like texts and things. So as soon as I've been going around talking to people, the voice has given up a bit, but it's fine. It's going to get us through. I just was thinking of sounds that I really like that schn sound. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Like, what's the best sounding dog? Schnauzer, right? Schnauzer. And schnitzel, you want to have a schnitzel. And a woman at an event in Melbourne last week said there's an episode of Big Bang Theory, which I have to confess I don't watch, where Penny said, I'm getting drunk on schnapps just so I can say schnapps. And I'm completely of that. I just like the schnapp. But then people have been saying to me, there's a famous artist. I'm uneducated in art, as in most things, but there's a famous artist called Julian Schnabel. Somebody knows that, right? Is that you, Joan? Yeah, Joan knows. So I had been saying Schnabel, but apparently it's Schnabel, but they will answer to anything.
But look, after saying Schnabel for so long, I heard Schnabel on Radio National, and then I was like, oh, I'm never going to remember that. But anyway, we can do either because you don't care.
That's right.
So dinner with the Schnabels. In Dinner with the Schnabels, Toni Jordan does what she does best, taking a magnifying glass to everyday life and slicing it up with forensic accuracy so that we can find ourselves inside her characters and laugh at our own foibles. Her kind of comedy is always smart and always kind. We don't laugh at other people's expense. We laugh because we know that life is basically absurd and we are absurd and our neighbours are absurd. And that is why this book works so very, very well. And to give you a little taste of that, we're going to start our evening with a reading. So while Toni gets her glasses on, the people who've just arrived can move up. They can sit at the side or in the front row. We do like front row people, so if you feel like sitting in the front row, feel free. Great. And we're going to get a reading from Dinner with the Schnabel.
So I don't think I have to set this up. I think the main character is Simon and he's unemployed. That's all I have to say. Now that Simon was home while the kids were getting ready for school, it would be a fantasy come true if his children could be quiet in the mornings. Wrangling children was such an enormous undertaking, he was surprised someone hadn't made $1 billion by designing an app. He went through the rigmarole every morning. First, he was woken by the sound of Tansy struggling the children to their feet as though raising the dead. Then listening while she fed and dressed them, while one, Lockie, got distracted by a song on the radio or had an urgent need to resolve some long-standing philosophical problem, like whether flies were disgusted by other flies. Lockie would say something like, one fly might go to another fly, Phil, you are way too clean today. You're making me want to spew. Roll in some poo right now. That would happen, wouldn't it, Mum? And what does Tansy say to that? I'm sure Dad knows the answer, is what she says. Why does she refer Lockie to him? He's clearly trying to sleep. She knows the same amount about flies as he does, which is precisely nothing. Simon hasn't secretly been Jeff Goldblum all this time. Then there's the packing of the lunch boxes, where parental effort was inversely related to reward. Tansy spent hours painstakingly cutting vegetables into interesting kid-friendly shapes that attracted zero interest. When she had an early meeting, Simon would slap together Vegemite and cheese on white bread with a side of pretzels, and the kids were so keen they'd scoff it on the way to school. And fruit. What a waste of time and money is fruit. Parents pack fruit, apparently, so that the fruit can enjoy a leisurely few hours out of the house. Then once the kids were physically at the front door and the door was opened, I lost the baby, sorry, and the door was open.
It's a cliffhanger.
The just hafters began. I just have to get my jumper or my library bag or my lightsaber. Simon once ran a business with clients and staff. He spent literal decades waking up before the alarm and heading out the door as dawn was breaking. Now he couldn't seem to force himself awake. Now the very idea of the day and what it might hold seemed more than he could handle. If he stayed in bed, which was preferable, then nothing else bad could happen. So that was how he spent his mornings before Naveen's garden was dropped on him. He was dragged to consciousness, either unwittingly by his noisy children or by an extreme act of will, because Tansy had left early and it was his turn to act as incompetent butler / cook / fly philosopher. It had, in fact, been a long time since Simon had felt competent at anything.
Oh, beautiful. What a lovely way to be introduced by our main character. We have Simon. I think we should talk about the cast because it's such an incredible cast in this book. Toni, you have done the best job of describing people that I feel like I know. So we have Simon, he's unemployed, and you can see he's a really competent father, despite the fact that he doesn't know anything about flies. And Tansy has been mentioned. Now, Tansy is his wife, and the kids. And who else have we got?
So we've got the kids, Mia and Lockie, and then we've kind of got Tansy's family, which are a big force in Simon's life. So Tansy's elder sister is Kylie, and her younger brother is Nick, and their mother is Gloria. And so she's kind of Simon's mother-in-law, who he has an interesting relationship.
That is, I think we'll come back to his mother-in-law. She's a very fascinating character. And you mentioned Naveen there, the garden that Simon is going to be doing the gardening for. And Naveen was really interesting because it felt a little bit like, I've written it down because I knew I'd forget the name of the film. The Royal Tannenbaums. There's a character called Eli Cash who wants to be a Tannenbaum.
Oh, I love that.
And this guy is there all the time because he just wants to be one of the kids. And I felt when I was reading Naveen, I was just like, this is Eli Cash from the Royal Tenenbaums. He just wants to be one of the kids.
Yeah, and he's that, what's his name? You know, with thank you. See, these people know what Owen Wilson. Exactly. Yeah, Owen Wilson, right. Yeah, so he wants to be one of the Schnabels, but he's not really a Schnabel. Yeah. But the problem is there's an important Schnabel family event coming up, which is the memorial service for Tansy's estranged father. And Naveen has offered his backyard. And then because of staffing issues, a lot of things. The gardeners have pulled out and it's not going to get done. So Simon, being unemployed and technically, allegedly competent, has a week to finish the garden, and
it's a great cracking start. But of course, when we're meeting Simon for the first time, he's waiting for another family member that we have not yet mentioned.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about one?
There's one more person. So when Tansy's parents got divorced, David went off and started another family. So they have a much younger half sister. Who has surprised them all by showing up. And, you know, when Simon lost his business and their house, they're squished into this little flat, and the half-sister is staying with them, and she's kind of a millennial, and it's all a bit much for poor Simon. Yeah. The week is kind of overwhelming for him.
It's a wonderful place to meet him in this space where he is really overwhelmed and would rather be doing anything else except waiting for Monica to get off a train. Yeah. And it's beautiful. I mean, this book, how many people here have read this? To be putting on the spot, quite a few. So the people who have read the book, you realise that as soon as you hit page 1, you are running, and you are running along with Simon and running after Simon and running ahead of him quite a lot, actually, as he lags behind.
Yes. So this is 2 really fascinating points that I really want to talk about. Yes. Because not that I'm trying to show off to anybody who might be an expert on story structure who's in the audience, but I was faced with this idea of this very low stakes story, right? Can a guy get a garden done in 6 days? Like, it's not, you know, diffusing a nuclear device or, you know, something like that. But so I decided to steal one of these sort of novelistic techniques from books that have much higher stakes, that we call the ticking clock, right? So every day there's a day and you're conscious of time passing. So it was kind of an experiment to see if I could make this story where, like, frankly, on global scales, lot is happening, feel like such a lot was happening.
The stakes are high.
Yeah, the stakes are high for him. So, I would I've had texts from, there's a manager of a bookstore in Melbourne who was sending me texts like, it's Wednesday, I want to get a ute and get the papers and do it myself. I to try and feel this pressure that is kind of
It was. You are kind of getting to the end of the week and going, oh my God, what's going on? It really felt like that. You felt like, I know it's just a garden, but your heart was in your mouth, trying to get through. The other thing that you do, I know that we've hit the ground running here for the non-writers in the audience,
right.
But there are non-writers in the audience as well. But another thing that's really interesting is the structure of each chapter. And I just think that Toni Jordan is one of the cleverest writers working in Australia today. And this is on camera, and this is Toni Jordan. I think she is really one of the smartest writers working in Australia today, because what you do with each and every single chapter is genius. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you end your chapters?
I've worked really hard on this idea of how to make sure people can't get out of the story. So that's really my goal. Unputdownable is kind of the thing that's at the
Which
front
isn't
of
a
my
word,
mind.
but anyway.
I write it on every book. It should be a word, right? Unputdownable should be a word. So I work at, chopping off chapters, a few paragraphs away from where they should end. So a few paragraphs that way. So maybe you might think, I'll just, get to the end of the chapter. And then when you get to the end of the chapter, you've already started a new little thing and that continues, or do it the other way so it carries over.
Impossible to get out of this story at any point. I just dare anyone to put this book down unless you absolutely have a family emergency. It's impossible. And I think that really is like, I'm sorry to kind of pull the cloth away from the Wizard of Oz and to find out who's running the show, but for those people who don't want to know how a story works, but this is really unique. I haven't come across anything quite as clever as this in a book before, and I think it does, we can invent the word unputdownable, even though I hate it, because for once that you actually cannot put this book down, and it is about the structure. It is really good. I will get back to the story now, because I know that there are just a few non-writers in the audience. I'm really interested in the relationship between Simon and Tansy. And I have to admit, when I was reading this book, I thought you were Tansy, because Tansy is so capable and so smart and so kind of on top of everything that it reminded me of you. And that's how I saw Tansy.
Right.
And can you talk a little bit about how Tansy would see Tansy and how Simon would see Tansy and the difference between the two things?
I'm delighted that you would think that I would be like Tansy, because Tansy is a no-nonsense, but she's also a very practical kind of person. But I don't see myself really as Tansy. They have an 8-year-old girl called Mia, who is 8 going on 52, which was kind of me as a child. So I really see myself as Mia. And in fact, when I got here tonight, I was a little bit late, because I hadn't noticed there was a stain on this dress when I packed it. But I'm the kind of person who carries a dry cleaning pen in their hand. So I was able to treat the dress, and it's perfect now. So this is
dry cleaning.
It's not normal, right? And when I used to live in Norman Park, I got someone in to calibrate my oven. Like, that's not right, so someone will come to your house and measure that the oven is the right temperature as you think it is on the knob. Like, that's not right?
No, that's not. There's something going on.
There's something going on. So
it's interesting.
So Tansy is much more laid back than me. She's like a no-nonsense, get it done kind of person.
Yeah.
And I instead am the kind of person who calibrates their oven and carries a dry cleaning pen to cover all occasions.
But we do right from the very beginning. We have two views of Tansy.
Yes.
And Simon's view of Tansy and Tansy's view of Tansy would be totally different. And our audience view is somewhere a little bit different.
But I want to do that with everybody, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that really fascinates me and it's why the characters look so normal on the outside, like they're very average people on the outside, but inside, but there's no such thing as an average person, right? There's no one exists who is an average person. So inside, I try to make this deep interiority, so you have no idea about the thoughts that are going on behind them, which is different from the way they project. And so when the reader reads the story, I'm hoping that the reader is seeing a more accurate version of the story than the characters in the story.
Yes.
And it's a fascinating thing because often we're all so close to our lives, we can't see them with a bit of perspective. And this is very relevant to me because lots of girls from my school friends are here who, hello, school friends. So we've known each other for like 40 years. And I don't know about you guys, but I did not think I was particularly beautiful at school, right? But when I look back on our photos, I go,
Yeah.
fuck, we were gorgeous. So gorgeous. But we couldn't really see it, because you can't see it. Then.
But that is the trick, I think, with that kind of the three perspectives that you always get in this book. You always get the character, you always get Simon's perspective on everything because Simon is really the focused character of the book. But you also get somebody else's perspective, whoever that we're talking about, whether that be Naveen, whether that be Monica, whether that be Tansy. And then the audience kind of hover somewhere just ahead of everybody else. And I want to talk a little bit about this idea that the audience is always 1 or 2 steps ahead, or sometimes 5 or 6 steps in the case of Simon. I have to admit he's a little bit slower. But the audience is so much more ahead of everyone else. And why did you choose to do that? Because again, I really think this book needs to be taken apart and forensically looked at by all writers because it's genius. And this gives you this kind of weird, wonderful perspective on the book.
I first saw this done by the crime writer Schnabel, right, who wrote a lot of novels in the 2000s, and his detective was David Wenham in the movies. Those, anyway,
I don't know.
he has this detective who's slightly on the dim side, right? So you're seeing it through his point of view, it's everything that's happening, but he's misinterpreting everything that he's accurately describing. So the reader is like, no, that's not what that clue means. What are you doing? So, I first read his books maybe 15 years ago, and I kind of tucked it away as a really cool thing to happen, to have the reader just fractionally ahead. So Simon is telling you his life as exactly as he sees it. He's not in any way bullshitting. This is how he thinks, right?
Yeah.
And there's one little incident that's a small thing. So Tansy's made dinner, she's made tacos for them and the kids. And they get an unexpected visitor who stays for dinner. And she's very gracious, please stay for dinner. She puts all the tacos out, blah, blah, blah. And then she has one taco, right? And Simon thinks to himself, why is she having one taco? Maybe she thinks she's fat. Maybe I haven't told her how much I admire that little tummy of hers. Maybe I'll point it out to her tonight as we're getting ready for bed, how much I like her little tummy. So she doesn't.
The reader's just going, no!
Like, it's a genuine thought. He's thinking to himself, is my wife on a diet? Have I not made her feel comfortable in her body? Maybe I'll compliment her little tummy, right? Of course, she's had one taco because she's made a certain amount and someone else is here, right? So she's having less so that there's more, right? But he just doesn't get it. So I'm hoping that, and I'm sure that the reader is going, don't do that.
Yeah, I'm totally the whole way through. I think, does everyone who read this book, were you just there going, stop? It's behind you. It's really clever. It's really, really clever. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was kind of a little bit thrown when, we have every book is marketed in a particular way.
Yeah.
And I think that the term for this book in the marketing world is commercial fiction.
Yes.
And yet I've read this book kind of going, my God, this is like the craft in this book and the work that the reader is doing in this book is at the highest end of literary fiction. Like, I kind of think this is almost your most literary book that you've ever written because you are making the reader do all this work that your character is absolutely not doing. But the reader is doing it, and they're doing it with these tiny little clues that you're giving, like the tuncos, like the little Billy. And so I kind of don't understand what is the difference in a way between
It's such a good question. And it's something that's kind of plagued me from the beginning of my writing career. So my first book edition, which actually, you know, they're going to film the movie the second half of this year.
Perfect.
Yeah,
that's time.
I know, but anyway, I thought it was probably a romance because there's a romance in it, right? So I sent it to the Romance Writers of Australia. That was the first place I ever sent it. And they sent me back a little assessment, and it said, "You're so far out of your depth, it's not funny," in quote marks, right? And I'm like, okay, so then it's not a romance, right? That told me that it wasn't a romance. And so then I got it published, and it's been published, that first book, in 18 different countries and 16 languages. So, and you can, when you look at each country, everybody, so I did interviews with the Financial Times and Psychology Today in Denmark about the way the word hysteria has feminist overtones because it comes from the root of the womb, hysteria meaning the womb, and how women's, thank you, midwife in the back, uterus, how the definition of a mental illness is deeply patriarchal. And so I was interviewed by a psychologist about my feelings about how this is in the book, right?
Wow.
And then in the UK, they put it on the morning TV show as a comedy. And all the different, my Serbian edition is full of sciencey stuff.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of science.
Yeah, and the one of the ones in the US has a picture of a piece of lemon tart on it. So it's amazingly varied. It's kind of
read
responsive.
differently by different audiences.
Yeah, and my first publisher, we shared a publisher for a while, and my first publisher said he wanted to prepare me, and he said, "You're going to get shortlisted and longlisted for a lot of prizes." And I was very happy. I was happy to hear it. And he said, "But you're never going to win one, because the funny books never win."
Well, that is an interesting, and that's probably leads me to my next question, which is why comedy is seen as the second cousin to tragedy, when comedy is actually harder to write.
I think it's to me it's something that I'm very proud of. Like if someone, I see something on Facebook or something where someone said, "I burst into laughing on the train and everyone stared at me," like that's excellent. But it's funny how in books it's not, in film we prize it a lot, and on television we prize it a lot, but not so much for some reason in books. And I don't really know the answer to that.
No, I don't either, and I'm really interested to find out, because we do prize it in plays.
Yes.
And in fact, you did a little bit of a look into plays.
I did.
As part of your PhD.
I did a PhD. This is so irrelevant, but so dusty. So everything that I've written, right, I have to think about getting it published and what it's going to be like when it's out there and who's going to read it, blah, blah, blah. But when I do my PhD, no one reads PhDs anyway. I can do anything I want, right? So I came up with this idea to see if people who were sometimes considered to be romance writers were really romance writers. So I looked at Molière, the 17th century French playwright, who is normally considered a genius and not a romance writer. And I presented a case that he did in fact write romance. And it's the fact that romance has such a low cultural value, and he is so clever that people can't put those two things together, when in fact he's clearly a romance writer in my view. And I also looked at the work of Jane Austen, and I presented the case that she was not a romance writer, basically because the romance bits bore her to death.
Yeah.
So I looked at all the proposals
Fancy romance.
in all the books, and every embarrassing proposal, like Mr. Collins to Lizzie, or the first one of Darcy where he stuffs it so badly and says, "I like you despite my better judgment." great. She puts it in extreme detail. She loves all that, right? And all the successful proposals, it's like one sentence. Darcy proposed again, she said yes. She's so bored by the romance. And the weddings, she gives no credence to whatsoever. In Emma, the entire wedding that we've been building up to is 2 lines where she says, the wedding was much as you would expect a wedding between these 2 people to be. Like, she's bored with the romance. She's really interested in the satire and the character comedy and the romance also. So I tried to present the case that Jane Austen did not write romance. And then I looked at Nora Ephron, the playwright, and I said that, yes, she did write romances, but it was a lot more complicated than that. She's really postmodern in the way she uses techniques and layering textual and subtextual elements to make her case for and against romance.
Right.
So, but the fun part, right, was because no one's going to read it anyway, I divided it into these 3 sections of the PhD, and I wrote the Molière section in a play in rhyming couplets, which is the way Molière wrote it. And I wrote the next bit as a Jane Austen short story in the same language, and I wrote the last bit as a screenplay presenting to me Nora Ephron. But it was so much fun. It was meant to be.
And then everybody goes and borrows your PhD thesis from the library. That's fantastic. Now, one of the things we mentioned it before too, that you have been speaking to no one for a couple of years in Melbourne lockdowns. How is it writing like a book in a lockdown? Because there's a lot of places in this book, and I personally like to go and look at those places when I'm writing.
I never like to go and look at anything. That's what Google Maps are for. I am really just the laziest person alive. And like 9 Days, my historical novel, I did the research in like 6 weeks and Googled everything and stuck it in. And I'm actually now a case in someone else's PhD. Someone I know wrote a case about the importance of genuine and immersive historical research in historical novels. And she said, would you be my opposite case? And I'm like, yeah, because I like to spend 5 seconds on Google. So she wrote a chapter about my approach, which is really nothing because I'm so lazy.
But do you have to get someone to check it for you then? Do you have to get someone to go those places to make sure you've got it right?
But really, I don't care if it's right, to tell you the honest truth. I care if it seems right. So I would rather it be wrong and seem intuitively right than be right and have people go, hang on, let me just double check because that doesn't sound right. Like I'm so much more interested in keeping people in the story than making it accurate, Although I have got in trouble once because in my first book edition, I actually am no good with numbers, right? I'm extremely controlling in so many areas of my life, but not numbers. I guess that's why I chose it, because I'm free of any actual baggage about that kind of thing. And I've got this little bit in addition where Grace, the main character, adds up the letters in her mother's name. And she says it's 23. My mother adds up to a 23, right? It's 24, right? And I've written, I cannot count to 23, right? 24. This is how I am with numbers. And so I kid you not, for 5 years, I got emails from people going, just let you know on page 12, it's like this. And I mean, it's fine. And I'm delighted that they're reading it so carefully. And I replied to everyone, said, thank you so much. But I'm not doing that again. So, things that I think I can get caught out on, I do.
You're going to get checked. Yeah, fair enough. So writing in a pandemic actually wrote to your strengths because you wanted to sit at home and Google and you could.
Because I don't have to get out of my pajamas. I can make cocktails at the end of every day, nobody knows. And it's perfect. It's really perfect.
That's fantastic. But you also wove the pandemic into this book in a way that is so clever and much more clever than most of the other books that have done that so far.
Well, thanks. Look, it was a big decision because part of me was thinking, that's the last thing anybody's going to read about. And it's not in there, right? So it's just assuming everybody knows what we know.
Yes.
So that there's no pandemic content. There's just
a couple of masks.
Masks in the back of bags, or people's, I stood a couple of paces back, like the lightest of touches.
Yeah.
But it was a big decision. And at the beginning of 2020, when we were all getting into this, or midway through, I had a chat with a couple of other writers, and they both said to me, I'm writing historical fiction for the rest of the decade because it just seemed like a big problem. Like, how are you going to do it? you're going to be accurate and bore people to death and give people PTSD from having to go through it all again, or you're going to just, how is it going to be managed? But I kind of thought that if I timed it right and the book was coming out now and we were coming out now, which I had kind of a gut feeling would be, because I went back and researched the 1917 Spanish flu epidemic, right, which lasted for a little bit short of 3 years. And I thought, okay, so 3 years back then, we're a bit smarter now. Turns out we're not. But I thought maybe we were, right? At the time, we would be. Turns out we've got a lot of people who really want to live in jail like 14th century prisons. But, I couldn't have predicted that, right? So I kind of made a guess of when we would be coming out and I thought if I did it right, I could capture by looking at one person who's lost a lot and has been very traumatized, and how he can reframe that in terms of his family and friends to so that it made a different conclusion in his head.
It's done so well. It's very delicately handled, but it is so important to book. Without the pandemic, we would not have this book. And it also led to possibly my favourite scene in the Untitled, which I was just talking before about, which is where Simon goes to help somebody at a job interview and doesn't realise that he's at a job interview for a very long time.
Yes.
So he's in this conversation.
Yeah.
And everybody he's talking to is a lot younger than him.
Yeah.
So for him, it's like this paternalistic, I'm going to help this woman with her interview that she's asked me to come and talk to her about an interview, not realising that.
Obviously, she's asked me to role play, right? So she said he used to be her boss. And she said on the phone, how about an interview? Like I need somebody to help me. And he thinks, okay, she needs me to help her role play an interview because she's going for a job, right? In fact, she's got a company now of her own and she wants to hire her.
It's an incredible scene. And it's one that kind of captures two of the really main themes of this book, which is the idea of aging and the fact that generational change happens, and some people are a little bit too behind the wall to realise generational change has happened.
Yeah.
And also this idea of men wanting to feel in charge, and this idea that there's a need for some men to feel like they're competent and capable and in charge. And yet this scene kind of underlines all of the problems with that assumption and kind of turns it on its head. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about that idea of throwing millennials into this, because you're not a millennial yourself.
No.
Not at all. But how did you kind of get that? Because you got it so right. I mean, they're in this pink cafe. You can only have black coffee because the milk spoils the coffee.
Yeah.
And all the walls are millennial pink. And you have to, the only food you can order are donuts, which are glazed pink. But the pink donut he has is sriracha flavour.
Yeah, because that's the only thing to get the right pink, right? To match the walls for Instagram.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah.
So I mean, everything felt perfect to me. How did you get in the head of millennials? Did you kind of have to run that by someone?
The first thing to understand is I don't have any children. Therefore, I'm an expert on child raising. So I can cast my eye.
I love that bit.
I can cast my eye kind of well and truly over it. But I think the key is here to understand that things change, and in so many aspects, the reason these young people are incomprehensible to someone like us or someone like Simon is because they're trying to do the right thing in a way that we were never even interested in. Like we at 20 were thinking about how to do the right thing for me, and they're thinking about how can I do the right thing for more people. So they have a discussion about whether vowels are elitist. Like, so they decide to name their architecture firm with no vowels in it because they think, on some level, vowels carry a classist thing, whether you say, and that,
it's great. Or you could be Slovene and just like that's your language.
Right. Yeah, right. So that vowels carry, information about people. So they've decided they're going to leave all the vowels out. Right. And they're doing it, and someone's like, he doesn't get it, of course. but they're not doing it just to mess with him. They're doing it because they're trying to find a way to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
So, and I say this all the time because my third book now, 9 Days, the historical novel, is on the VCE English list in Victoria, right? And I never imagined this in a million years because I don't know him, other than hi niece, other than like I have 2 nieces and a nephew, but apart from them, I don't know any young people. But now I go to schools and I meet these year 12 kids who engage in discussions about a lot of feminist and classist themes about the book. And I just feel like they're so miles ahead of where we were at. And we were, as I said, my school friends are here. I think we were pretty good because we went to a school that had a real genuine commitment to social justice. And but they're all above that level and they're trying to find a way. And it doesn't make sense to us, but it's because their heart is so in the right place. It gives us hope, really, doesn't it? I think so.
And also that idea that that this is a book really about male depression, and that feeling of uselessness. And I just, I wondered how you got it so right. I know,
Do you want to, not male, sorry.
well, we might have a big reveal here, that's okay.
But actually, I was really inspired by the late American feminist theorist Bell Hooks. Okay. And she wrote a lot about, she said, this is not the direct quote, but it's something like this. She said something like, the first act of violence the patriarchy requires of men is not against women. The first act of violence the patriarchy requires of men is on any parts of themselves that they see as soft or feminine. And they're required to do damage to themselves, to their own psyche, to rid themselves of those things. And it's something that her work stuck with me for a long time because it's a reinforcement to me that the patriarchy is bad for everyone, like not just for women and not just for queer people. It's bad for everyone. It's bad for men as well, which is why men have a higher risk of suicide than women do. And a lot of other health issues that come from, the very first time they're told as children that boys don't cry, or the very first time, they're a straight boy is interested in going to ballet classes and he's laughed at by his friends. Like every single thing, the patriarchy is bad for all of us. So it's not us against them, it's all of us against the patriarchy. And I really think that was one of the main things
I think that this book will in future be discussed in grade 12 classes in terms of gender, because I think that, there's a lot in this book about the damage of patriarchy and about gender kind of norms and stereotypes and about the kind of generational change in those values as well. So I do think that this is an incredibly feminist book and it's an incredibly great and insightful look at gender as well. So thank you for giving that to us. Now, I know we have to go to questions very, very soon, but I really just want to talk about Gloria before we do, because Gloria, oh my God, can you tell us about Gloria?
Well, Gloria is Simon's mother-in-law and she has a particular view of the world. She's really one of these people who is a contrariist. So she will take whatever is the opposite position from the position that you take. And if tomorrow you say to her, I think I've changed my mind, you're right, she will say, well, I've changed my mind and now you're still wrong. Like she will just be the opposite of what you expect. And the only trouble I had in writing that character was that she just wanted to be in every scene and take over every scene. So part of the edit was taking out the Gloria bits because she's just so in the face.
She wants her own book.
She might get her own book. She might
hoping
get her own book.
She is the strongest, she is the most, she's strong, she's feisty. She just pins the nail on every kind of conversation that she has, to the point that, when the phone rings, you physically feel frightened for Simon every time his phone rings and it's Gloria.
I did take I must admit that I took a couple of her minor lines from my mother. So my mother, she's not with us anymore, so wherever she is, she can say whatever she likes. But there is a couple of minor lines of Gloria's, like just throwaway lines that I took from my mother. So one of the lines that I took from my mother was Gloria saying, how do I buy a burqa? And my mother went through this phase of wanting to buy a burqa, being really, she would have been 74, I would say, at this point, really wanted to buy a burqa. And she was not an Islamic person, let me make that clear, not a Muslim person. And she was quite late to feminism. But in her late arrival at feminism, she was suddenly aghast that anyone would tell a woman what to wear, what she had the right to wear. And so her plan was to dress her 74-year-old self up in a burqa and walk in some redneck kind of capital, and in the hope that some poor unsuspecting redneck yelled out, "Go back to where you came from," or something, so she could unmask herself in a moment of kind of glory and reveal herself as the descendant of convicts. And she had an absolute language like a wolfie, and make them really wish they'd never done that. So this was part of kind of a broader plot that she had to launch herself upon unsuspecting racists wherever she found them.
I put that in the next book. In the next book. That's so great. It really is, like, if you haven't read this book, you need to read it just for Gloria alone. She is the person that I really would love to be when I am that age, and I am absolutely never going to be that because I am just too meek for Gloria. There is no one as strong as Gloria. She's fantastic. So I just want to open it up for questions from the audience now. I've got a whole page of questions I could have asked, but I haven't. But there's a lot of people here. Even if you haven't read the book, please feel free. Bianca.
Thank you. Thank you both so much, Krissy and Toni. It's such a joy to be here in person with you. I just had a question. I'm going to out myself as one of the writers, emerging writers in the audience, and I just wanted your take on openings. You talked a bit about chapter structure. As a writer, I feel like I would love to know from someone who's been in the writing game for many years, in terms of how you approach the opening, at what point. Is it always the first thing you write?
Yep.
And if you have a bit of advice around
Thank you.
coming to reveal.
So it is the first thing I write. And if I had my whiteboard behind me now, some of you know this thing, but if I had my little whiteboard here, I would draw a little square that would have planners and pantsers on it. So people who plan out their novel kind of in a spreadsheet with a lot of forethought and deliverance, and people who are called pantsers, who are like me, who make it up from day to day. And then on this axis, I would have knitters and quilters, which knitters being people who, it's like they're knitting a scarf. So you cast on the first line and then you just go forward, which is me. I have to have that first line or I can't go anywhere. Or people who don't need to start at the first line, they might go, well, I don't know what happens at the beginning, but I've got an idea for a scene that's kind of halfway or, toward the end. And so I write that, and then I write one over here, and then, they get 20 or 30 scenes, and then they stitch them together like a patchwork quilt. So, these are kind of the categories you find yourself falling into, but I'm very much a knitting pantser. But this book is a little bit different because it's the first one that I've really come to with a lot of intent. So I felt that really the inspiration behind it was in 2020, I found myself watching a lot more television than I'd ever watched before, which I'm sure a lot of us did. And I found myself drawn to shows like Schitt's Creek and Ted Lasso and those, heartwarming stories about people who do everything wrong for the right reasons because they don't know how to express how they feel or they're not clear about something, right? So this was the first book that I've ever written where I sat down and thought, right, the plan is going to be to make people smile. That's the plan. So I started chapter 1 and the publisher never sees it to the end, but I often send them the first chapter just for voice because it's too hard to start again with a different voice. So I sent my publisher, Rebecca, the first chapter for the voice, and she said, no, the voice is fine, happy with Simon, like all that. It's too slow. It's way too slow. The beginning is too slow. And so then I just sat on that because I couldn't envisage it starting any other way and kept going. And when I got halfway through, I had a chat with another friend of mine, Alison Goodman, who writes those dragon fantasy books. And I said, beginning was all right to me. And she said, it's interesting, but the person who's coming to stay with them is Tansy's half-sister, not Simon's. It's not directly connected enough to your protagonist. And so I cheated a little bit and I had a kind of blinding flash of the obvious about what was wrong with that slow beginning, and I put a prologue in so the reader could be ahead of Simon from the very beginning. So I kind of changed that a little bit.
I was curious about that, like to prologue or not to prologue.
Yeah, because normally, the general consensus is not to prologue, because people tend to use prologues as, we're all reinforced show don't tell. So they put a prologue in there to tell something. And I didn't want to kind of fall into that error. I wanted to signal that this story was about the reader knowing more stuff than Simon from the very beginning. So that's how
It really sets up that dance so easily, that kind of, the fact that it throws somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the reader knows that, and that Simon doesn't.
Yeah.
So you immediately have Simon being a bit slow.
Yeah.
From page one, which is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Any other questions? And also, if you're on Zoom, you can type into the chat bar, and I will get a text from the front desk with your question. So feel free
How clever is that?
to put your questions in the chat bar, and I'll check my text. But anybody else in the room have any questions? I have more if you don't. I'm going to.
Gary, hang on, Gary's at the back.
Great.
And the non-reader and non-writer.
Thanks for coming anyway, Gary.
Yeah. See you again. But you made a comment with photos. You said, the main purpose was for commercial, to make it commercial. How much in the book is for yourself?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not one of these people who writes for self-expression, although writing is wonderful for that. But if I did that, it would be my diary or my notebook or a journal that I keep. I feel that I know you had Lee Kaufman here last night, who's just written a really remarkable book about the art of writing. And but that's not a side of writing that I really identify with. I see myself as a craftsperson, and I see myself working in the tradition of crafts people who have woven things and spun things and made things from clay and fired them and mosaic things with their hands to make something useful and beautiful that someone else will find useful and beautiful, and then, gone home and took their bra off and lay on the couch and watched Bridgerton. Like, I don't see myself as an artist sitting in having a muse or having that kind of inspiration or that kind of process where I'm exploring something extremely highbrow. I've never really seen it that way. I've seen it as falling into a very long tradition of craftspeople who make useful, beautiful objects.
Should come next week to Graham Simpson's book launch about his book about writing, because there's definitely a lot more about the kind of structuring and.
Yeah, but I don't do any of that structuring.
No, I know. And your book that you would write would be like something in between and something different.
Yeah, and my book that I would write would be based on this model of planners, pantsers, knitting, quilters, which means you have permission to do it any way you like, right? There's somebody successful who does it however you choose to do it. And the thing that worries me about the idea that, it's deeply a difficult process. I've honestly never found it a difficult process. I think about, my mum who worked her whole life, my grandmother who was worked in fish steam laundry for her entire working life, and how lucky I am to have the benefits of education that they didn't have.
Yeah.
And I've never seen it as incredibly difficult process. I've seen it as something that's joyful to do every day. But the message for the writers in the room is you don't have to do it any way that somebody else does it. You can do it however you choose, and there's someone who does it that way.
Please write that book. Please write that book. I totally would love that book. Any other questions from the audience or from Zoom? Is there a Zoom on there? From the audience here? Well, I would like to ask you a little bit about the editing process. We've talked a little bit about the writing process.
Yeah.
But editing is a whole different thing.
Yes.
And with a book like this, which is so tightly woven,
Yeah.
was it intense?
This had a more intense editing that I've had for a number of books. And part of that was also the timing, because we knew that if it was going to come out in April, it had to feel like now, because that's what I was trying to capture, the now of it, the moment of it. So there was a lot of going backwards and forwards. And the other thing that my editor for this book was so good at is I think my writing has two major flaws, and one is description. I'm not good at it because I'm not a very visual person. It's so much easier for me to write dialogue because I can hear people speak. I'm really clear on language. I can hear them speak. I'd rather write 100 pages of dialogue than like 2 pages of description. So I had to, she was very much beef this up, because I'm skimming over the bits I don't like, right? Yeah. And she's right, of course. And the other thing is that in my first draft, I take everything a bit too far, take every joke a bit too far, and it's just a bit try hard. And I can't see myself ever managing to do that in any other way, because if I'm editing myself in that first draft, I'm never going to get it funny. If I'm kind of holding back deliberately, I think I just have to give myself permission to be deeply stupid, which it always is. And then she goes too far. And then it comes back to being right. Yeah. So it was more interventional editing than I expected.
That's fascinating. Look, we are out of time now, but 2 things I take away from this is that I want your writing book, and I want you to take this book apart in it so that you can teach us all how you made it, because to be honest, this is one of the greatest works of Australian fiction that I have read in years. I was constantly just wanting to go, how did you make that work? It worked so well. And I think anyone who hasn't read this book in the audience is in for an absolute treat, because it's one of the best books written in Australia, but it's also a delight to read. And those 2 things very rarely go together. So congratulations, Toni Jordan. Thank you so much. Consider this Brisbane launch.
We are going to, because there's so many people in the room, we're going to make this a little bit easier to get to the signing area by taking Toni out first. So I suppose the people who are in the doorway, we're going to have to remove them. But then we're going to go take Toni to